Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of today, and that's Mariette van der Hoven. She is Professor of Medical Ethics and also a Chair of the Department of Ethics, Law and Medical Humanities of the Amsterdam University Medical Centers. She is based in Amsterdam, but she's well, giving lectures all over the world, like many of us do nowadays. And her topic today is how to empower people through education and training to do the right thing, to act according to responsible conduct of research. And she do that from the background she has as the coordinator of the Horizon 2020 program, Integrity. She is also involved in another European consortium called Path to Integrity. And Mariette is really an expert on how to organize education and give it an international outreach and flavor. So I look forward to your presentation, Mariette, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lex, and thank you for being here today on this very interesting NRIN Day, where education on research integrity is at well, the core of our discussions, I hope. And what I'd like to present to you is indeed part of a project called Integrity, which I'm coordinating and currently still working a bit in Utrecht University, where this program is mainly coordinated from, and also at Amsterdam University Medical Center. The key word of my presentation is empowerment, and let me explain to you how I envisioned this talk when preparing it. First, I want to say something about empowerment as a teaching philosophy, and for those of you who have heard more presentations about this, this is a bit of a repetition, but I also try to follow up on this and try to show you also how this is not only developed into courses that are reaching out to, for example, PhD students, but actually it is scaffolding to different study phases. And I will explain that a bit later. Then I will give you an example of our teachings. I will actually present one of the small private online courses very briefly that we have been developing, where we use this notion of empowerment and how I think it is embedded in the design of the course. And then finally, I want to say something about how we evaluated and how we did some educational research also on this concept of empowerment, because, well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, you could say. Also in this line of business, in education, how do we know that the impact of this teaching philosophy of empowerment is also successful and has any positive impact that we envisioned from the start? So is it not only an ideal that we're talking from, but can we also show that in the effects of, or the impact of, these courses? And this is actually a new element, because these findings are quite new in our project. So let me first return to this concept and what we call a teaching philosophy on empowerment. Why do we take an empowerment perspective on courses on research integrity? And I actually always prefer to talk about courses in responsible conduct of research. And this has to do with the way that we have been defining education and also the perspectives on research integrity in the field, where research or responsible conduct of research is considered to take a positive attitude towards learning people how to become how to behave in a responsible way, or how to become a responsible researcher. And when you want to train people in research integrity, it makes sense to actually choose this perspective of RCR, because usually we teach this to students or novice researchers who are still learning how to do research well, and then to incorporate a view on how to do how to behave in a responsible manner, and how to be a good researcher also in the sense of current high standards on research integrity, seems an obvious way to choose. And that's what we did. And there was another reason why we took empowerment as a core perspective in this project. The idea that future researchers or researchers who are currently working in practices need to have the right competences, the right capacities to actually behave in a responsible manner is a perspective that requires something that will actually build these capacities. And there the empowerment perspective becomes a very strong idea. But also empowerment is a perspective that has a very strong association with ideas of being able to get grip on your own research, so to learn to take control, or to being able to develop what we call a critical autonomy, and with that we mean a self-reflective attitude, where people are able to deliberate independently on issues that they are confronted with in practice, and that people are able to evaluate the context of their research in a manner that is not always directly related to the hierarchy in which you are functioning or to the commonalities that you encounter in practices, but that you are able to evaluate that on its own merits and in a critical but positive manner. And you see 5 core elements that we thought of when developing our teaching philosophy of empowerment, where building capacities is one of the core ideas of building our courses on, but also helping to learn control and this critical autonomy. But then it doesn't stop. So learning to hear and see and speak up, as the famous monkeys that you see in this slide usually do not, because they do not hear, they do not see, and they do not speak. This empowerment idea also also invites researchers to become more proactive and act upon their decisions. So not only see and deliberate on what you see happening in a research context, but also to be more active on that and act upon your decisions. So sometimes the notion of active bystanding is also used, but maybe the word proactive is sufficient enough, because the word active bystanding also is not the most familiar one all around the globe. And finally, it stimulates an attitude of openness and courage. And I think to those of you who are working in the field of research integrity, these things are not new, but if you bring them together in one perspective and take this as a starting point for all the educational trainings that you are developing, then you see that there is a different kind of perspective that you take on the things that you develop and also on what you would like to achieve, where this combination of control, capacities, autonomy, and proactive attitude are always used in combination. So it's not just one aspect, but it's actually always the 5 in a relation to each other that we try to stimulate in our courses in RCR. This is the basic idea of the project that we have been running for 3 years now, and it's nearly coming to an end. We only have 1.5 year extra in the integrity project. And the main aim was that when we had built this one teaching philosophy that we can use all, that we can develop that into a competence profile, which was based on this notion of empowerment, these 5 core starting points for empowerment, that we can then scaffold this for each of the study stages that students or participants of our trainings are in, and that we can also scaffold it for the different disciplines that people are working in, and also can include country-specific elements if necessary and if relevant with regards to responsible conduct of research. And we also aimed to develop some, well, what we now call blended course materials, and everyone has gotten used to that the past 1.5 years, because most of the teachings have been done in online ways. But also that people can use it in their own curricula, that you can embed it in ways that fits best in your own curriculum, or that you can also accommodate it a bit to your own pace within your own university or your own educational program. And this is also a very important element of the course materials that we try to develop. And you'll see on the right of the right side of the slide that we have been developing these course materials and have been using this teaching philosophy on empowerment at several levels. So we started at high school levels, upper high school levels of students all over Europe. And we have been testing materials in various countries, like in Ireland and Portugal and Slovenia, where an interesting thing is that people might initially be inclined to think that research integrity is not the most relevant or most immediate or urgent topic for high school students, but still they are being introduced and prepared for the field of our higher education, which they will enter in a year or so. And they do have some experiences with, for example, some small research projects that they are conducting. And you can also make some analogies with other discussions that they are much more familiar with. Furthermore, we developed these courses also for undergraduate students, where also at their own a level of experience. So it doesn't make sense to have any discussions on authorship, for example, with undergraduate students, but you can have very relevant discussions with them about many aspects of research integrity already. And we did a survey actually to find some evidence what the most relevant topics for these types of students were. Further, we developed it for what is called early career researchers, but here we mainly focused actually on PhD students. And we also developed a course for supervisors, mainly in relation to the supervision that they have for PhD students and how integrity issues are relevant there. At this slide, you see a few examples of tools that we have been developing, and I just mentioned the various target groups. On the left upper side, you see some of the examples of logos that are used to support high school tools. There is a great variety actually of tools that have been developed and that are currently being used. They're mainly they can be used in a blended way, but they're not online tools as such. So it's not like what you see on the right upper hand, which is a tool for the undergrad students, where we developed a website with a narrative, with a kind of a game element where students can enter and follow a story of a student and then encounter some integrity issues, and then they have to make some choices. And the consequences of these choices are shown, and some background information is given about what the relevance of these integrity issues is and where they can find further information on these issues. So the high school tools are more like cards that are being used, or PowerPoints that are available for teachers. And well, these will all be available on our project website within a short time, because we are in the final stages of the project. But we also have developed other types of tools. So for example, on the left bottom side, you see Dîner Pensant, which will be reorganized again in April. We schedule another one. A Dîner Pensant is actually meant for everyone who's involved and interested in research integrity. And this is kind of a, well, this is an event where we give some food for thought. So in a very entertaining way, we bring to the fore several cases of research integrity that are being discussed by people at virtual tables. And this was an online event that we organized last October, and which will, of course, which I just said will also be organized again. And on the right bottom, you see a scene or a picture from a scene that we filmed with actors. We tried to develop some innovative and appealing tools that play the role, or that have the effect that people actually want to have discussions about these scenes that they have been watching. And this is also being used in the various courses that we developed. So in, for example, the PhD courses and the course for supervisors, we use these scenes as a starter for discussion. We think that by building some appealing tools, it also becomes more attractive for teachers and students to actually use the materials. And that's also a good thing, we think, because in the past we have seen some course evaluations where people always used to tend to think that they already know so much about research integrity, they don't have anything to learn, while the further they come in their career, so for PhDs, it's often quite obvious that they can still learn a lot. But for many research master students or undergrad students, you still have to do a bit of your best to actually appeal them to the topic and make it more relevant to them. And that's what we have been trying to do in various ways, both by the teaching philosophy as well as by trying to come up with some appealing materials. Now, let me focus on one of these courses. This is a PhD course. We call it RCR Course, How to Do Things Right. And actually, you see two samples of parts of that course. On the right upper side, you see the layout of the course as is. It is a course that has been developed by Elevate Health, or together with Elevate Health. And it's an online course which is called a SPOC. A SPOC is a small private online course. You have the full course experience within that online environment. And small groups of students or participants enter these courses and work together on course assignments, get some information, have videos that they can watch, sometimes have individual assignments in a portfolio environment. And at the end, they can obtain a certificate if they have finished the course. And have done well, have accomplished all the tasks. In this case, we're talking about a 4-week course. It takes 4 weeks, and each of the weeks new course materials open up. So you cannot do it in your own pace, because you really have to discuss with other participants about issues. And that's one of the big advantages of these online courses, that people really get an experience of being in it together, like in a face-to-face course environment. The average workload here is 2.5 hours a week. And after 4 weeks, we wrap up, and we sometimes give them an extra week to finish their course assignments. And then the certificates are being given. There are interactive assignments, as I just already said, individual as well as group work. And this is sometimes a bit of a challenge if you do not really know each other, and people from all over Europe are participating, as have been in the various runs that we had during this project. But the technique was helping us a bit, and in the end we were able to do this in a very smooth way, that people could choose their own groups and work together quite well. The topics that are involved in this course this is more like a general course with a very short introduction into various topics. So each of the weeks, a different topic is being addressed. In the first week, it's about doing research well in general. And the second week, it's about supervision and mentoring. The third week, about publication, reviewing, and evaluation. And then the final week, we wrap everything up and bring things together. The example on the left side is how we try to make it appealing. We have made some cartoons, 9 cartoons actually, where we typify how you could be supervised. And all supervisors all supervisors put emphasis on several aspects in their supervision. And we just have a very simple question to the participants: how can you characterize your own supervisor best? And does that also match with your expectations? And if it doesn't match with your expectations, what do you want to do about this? Is this something that you ever talked about together, or is something you can talk about it together? And it's just a very challenging and inspiring assignment, where we also ask them, and if you would be supervising, or if you are already supervising someone else, how can you typify yourself? And do you think that matches with the expectations that others have? And this is really a good self-reflective assignment for the students. A little bit more about this course. How did we think that we were able to put this idea of empowerment also into the design of our courses? Because we do not only have this teaching philosophy, as I just explained, but it's also, if you have it developed, you also need to show how you can use it and utilize it in the courses. And I've put 3 examples on the slide, very simple examples actually. In the first learning unit, in the first week, we simply present the ALIA Code of Conduct, and then we ask them a simple question that they have to do themselves. So this is an individual assignment. And we ask them, okay, which of these aspects of the Code of Conduct are already in a positive way well taken care of in your own research project, and what could be improved? And this is very interesting, because everyone immediately understands what the idea is of this assignment. And we take the positive attitude by asking them what's already well taken care of and what it goes well, but also are there possibly some blind spots or are things that could improve or should improve that need to be addressed in your research project. And especially by balancing these together, it really pays off, and the participants usually come with very good stories about their own research project, and it's relevant to them. So it immediately put this into an example of experiential learning where the relevance to their own research projects is being shown. In another assignment, we use a case deliberation method, which is called the RCR reflection model. We have a small video where we introduce this model. We also have a PDF file where we show which questions and which steps need to be taken if you use this case deliberation method. And then we ask the students to use a case, and usually we present cases that derive from the Erasmus Dilemma game, which has recently been given an award. Congratulations for that, it's really an achievement. And the cases from the Erasmus Dilemma game, we often present to them, but also invite them to use their own cases if they like, and some of them do, but most of them still prefer the pre-given case in the course context. And then we ask them to use that step-by-step approach and show their reasoning skills, and if they are able to have these reflections in a very structured manner on that particular case. And that really works well if you present it also in this online course environment. We also do this group-wise. So sometimes we do this as an individual assignment, as in this particular course, but sometimes we do this in a more group-based model where we use a Wiki page like the Google Docs that everyone is now probably familiar with, where people can work on the same document together, or they can meet online, they can have like Zoom meetings and discuss the case and come up with a final reflection. But in this case, it's an individual assignment. And a third example of how we think that we could, so in the second assignment, 2.6, we try to stimulate these deliberative skills where critical autonomy is actually being stimulated. And in the third assignment, we ask them to, it's a portfolio assignment, and we ask them to find some information within their own institution about, for example, whom to turn to with questions if you have to have your research reviewed by an ethics committee, or who is responsible to help you with the GDPR regulations in your institution, or who is responsible for the data management, etc. And this is really has shown to be a really helpful exercise, because having this course being taken by many students all over Europe, we learned that not every university has everything put in place yet. So sometimes they came back and said, I really cannot find the person responsible for this within my own institution. And then we could sometimes help them with some general information about it, which was also part of the course material already. And this was also something that was important for them as well, that they could at least bring back their more generic information, but also address within their own institution why there still were some gaps in appointing people responsible for these relevant tasks. And here again, relating it immediately to their own research projects and making it relevant to them is, I think, really an asset of the course that we have built here. And it helps them also to become more aware of the context in which they are working. Now, let me turn to measuring this empowerment. So I've given you some examples now how we think that we have stimulated empowerment via assignments in this course and try to make it appealing and make it relevant for the participants who participate in these courses. But how do we know whether this indeed had the effect that we were expecting? Because we had this design, we had this teaching philosophy, and how do we know what works? So what we did was actually conduct an explorative study. There have been many studies already being conducted on effects of research integrity courses, but we tried it a bit differently. By not focusing that much on quantitative studies and validated surveys immediately, but choosing very specifically what would suit best the purpose of measuring empowerment. So there is no validated survey yet on measuring empowerment. So we decided to do it in a way that we held interviews with students after the course had finished, 2 weeks after finishing the course. We did use one survey, pre and post, which was examining as a validated survey on professional development and professional decision-making skills in research integrity, the so-called PDR test. But I can already tell you, we did not have enough results back in the pre and post. So in the end, we did not use these results. We used a case deliberation assignment. So the one that I just shown you, where they had to use this RCR reflection model, we simply studied with the help of a rubric these case reflections that they uploaded, and we asked, of course, their permission in advance at the start of the course. And to us, that could show what the status quo of their deliberation skills was at that moment in the course. And finally, we used some course reflections and course evaluation questions to also figure out what the opinions, so it's self-reported, what the self-reported opinions of participants were on the various competences that we try to simulate in this course. And the combination of the three provides us a picture of and an idea of the question whether we can indeed empower and stimulate empowerment among participants. We split the various types of data in experienced empowerment, so the more self-reported empowerment by participants, in 2 data sets, 1 interviews where 6 in total were participating, and course reflections and evaluations where 72 participants participated in and filled our data set. And we also try to measure the status quo, as I just said, about the competences. And there we had case deliberations, 48, and a survey, but there the response was too little, so we didn't use these. Now, let me show you a bit of the results. So from the course reflections, and I do not expect you to be able to read all these, so I just highlight some of the things that you see in this graphic. We formulated competences that we were expecting to be increased during this course. And we asked them, did indeed the course help you to increase? And then the upper one is your knowledge on when to consult others on RCR issues. And the colors are most important here. Blue is not at all, orange is to some extent, gray is to a moderate extent, and yellow is to a great extent. And then you can see that on average, the gray and yellow parts of the graphics are quite big. So on overall, most respondents were always quite positive about the courses and felt that it really improved or increased either their knowledge on to consult others, or one that really scored quite high was to become motivated to become a responsible researcher. It's actually 100% positive, gray and yellow. And one that scored a bit lower is my ability to handle integrity issues in my own research project. There, many participants scored a bit lower, and you see that orange part of the graphic is a bit bigger. So overall, the picture is quite positive here. Hardly anyone said not at all. This only happened in 2 cases. My motivation to become proactive on issues of responsible conduct of research. And we also inquired this, of course, in the interviews, why some people were a bit negative on that, or did not feel stimulated enough, or the courage to address integrity issues with colleagues, fellow students, supervisors. But the overall picture is quite positive. We also asked them, we showed them the learning aims of our course at the beginning and at the end of the course. And we asked them at the beginning, how relevant are these learning aims to you? Which gave us an indication what their expectations also of the course were. And at the end of the course, and this is the graphic of the end of the course, we also asked them, well, after having taken this course, are you now indeed more able to distinguish elements in a data management plan and find support to improve it? And you see a very positive picture again. Blue here is at the right side is very relevant. It's a 5-point Likert scale where that we used here, and the yellow and is relevant. The gray part says moderately relevant. So overall here, the picture is also quite positive, and only slightly less positive is are able to discuss responsibilities and expectations in supervision and mentoring. There you could say the gray area is a bit moderately relevant, is a bit bigger, and in knowing where to find support in handling issues with third parties, you see that they think slightly relevant or not at all relevant, 13% out of the 36 participants. So overall here, again, we see a very positive picture. Well, you can easily imagine that all the people who were taking our courses were quite positive because these were voluntary participants to the courses. So that's one way to explain it, but it's at least an interesting picture that they did feel stimulated in these aspects. And then we looked a bit more into various aspects of empowerment. Which aspects of empowerment do they feel more competent towards, and which were the things that they were explicitly mentioning in open questions, in the reflections, and in the interviews, and which was also shown clearly in the deliberations of the cases that we have been coding. And then the following topics that you see on the screen popped up. First, awareness was certainly increased about the topics of responsible conduct of research. Their knowledge was certainly increased, and this is something that we see in many courses, that knowledge in general increases. But the interesting thing here is that in addition to this aspect of knowledge, many of the participants very specifically indicated that this knowledge was embedded in a view that made them more aware of and also gave them a bit more power to use that knowledge within their own institution and to present it to their colleagues and in such a way that they could show that things needed to change within their own research group, or that the way that they were doing things was the right way to go. So they felt a kind of a backup by the knowledge that we provided. Reflection skills were certainly improved. They felt that the RCR reflection model was really helpful to them. Interestingly enough, in the case deliberations that we had, we did see that some of these case reflections could certainly had some room for improvement. So it was not the final thing that just presenting this reflection model to them suffices in itself and gives them enough tools. You certainly need to practice this a bit more if you want to become more skilled in it. But they already felt, and that's what was being said frequently in the interviews and in the self-reflections in the course, that was really helpful to them, and multiple PhD students, for example, asked also, can we use these RCR models also outside of the course environment? And of course they can. It's all publicly available because it's a European project. Another aspect that they really felt empowered in is motivation. They felt more strongly motivated, and you also saw that already in the graphics. They felt more motivated to behave and become a responsible researcher, and to also address these issues more often with their colleagues. They also felt more stimulated to be more courageous and have this courage to actually speak up to others. There is one nuance here in the interviews. It really became clear, and also in the graphics, that they still feel that it's really difficult to speak up to people who are your superiors. So supervisors already, they mentioned that they find it difficult to address these issues to their supervisor, and also with other senior people in the organization, but certainly with their colleagues, they felt more open. They felt that they could open up more and speak more about these issues together. So there's still, I think, something that we can stimulate even more, but for first attempt and first course, this was really, I think, a good result. And the ability to deal with integrity issues, we already saw in the graphics that this scored a bit lower than other parts. And sometimes they explained this also in the interview, saying, yeah, I feel that I'm stimulated in this aspect, but I also feel that I still have a lot to learn to actually feel confident enough to deal with integrity issues myself. So it was just a first start, this course. Often for many participants, this course was the first research integrity course that they took. So some quotes to what we found that people mentioned as positively contributing to empowerment. With regards to the competence of motivation, a participant said, if you don't know what to do yourself and you have all these senior researchers, I don't think that would motivate me to stand up. Or with regards to motivation in that sense, I could say that I feel more empowered. And this person actually used the word empowerment. Like, I know that it's important and that I should try myself to be as good as I can be in that sense. And also, if I encounter some kinds of problems, to address them, not to ignore them. So here you really see this attitude of, well, being motivated to actually stand up and do something and try something yourself. And with regards to courage, a quote more specifically, 4 of the interviewers mentioned that they, it was not a quote, that they mainly are courageous when it comes to addressing integrity issues with their students, friends, or colleagues. I already mentioned this. Being courageous was felt to be more difficult with supervisors or those higher in the hierarchy, due to higher risk of negative consequences if the relationship gets damaged. So I already mentioned this, but this was specifically something that we also heard in the interviews. So positively contributed to empowerment. Now, there were also some obstacles to empowerment mentioned. So it's not only an upside story here. Of course, the participants were also very much aware of possible obstacles to their being empowered within the organization. And 3 were very explicitly mentioned by them, both in the interviews and in the self-reflections. For example, the dependency on others. And here we have a quote. Someone very explicitly stated, in my university, I do not feel free to say something. We have a really hierarchical system and everyone higher has more power than the lower ones. And I think if I say something about integrity, they will shush me down. So the fear of consequences for your career, or that you're not being heard or not being taken serious, is certainly something that prevents them from stepping up and doing something. And for people working in the field of research integrity, this is not new, but it is underscoring again the relevance of addressing this in teaching PhDs and other at other stages, like at the undergrads and the high school levels already, that this is a really relevant aspect to take into account. And 2 other aspects that we are also familiar with in the literature are the institutional and research culture and the feeling of a lack of power to make any changes. And this latter one also reflects a bit, I think, on the dependency on others aspect. So this is something that the participants at least very clearly could also state and clarify to us as aspects and factors that do jeopardize a bit their feeling of empowerment and their being empowered in practice. So I come to some conclusions. I think that empowerment as a pedagogical view on RCR trainings is novel. It's something that we did not encounter in the literature on research integrity courses so far. And we also think that it leads to a positive proactive stance on learning to become a responsible researcher. So taking this stance, it fits with a plea that Mike Kaligman already made a few years ago, stating that we need to foster a positive research culture on research integrity. And taking this empowerment perspective can really contribute to this. It stimulates a critical autonomy of researchers. We designed courses for PhD students particularly, but also for the undergrads and high school students based on this teaching philosophy of empowerment. For the PhDs, we developed 4 SPOCs and 1 MOOC, and the MOOC will be available from January 1. We had an explorative study so far. So this is the first results that we have from these courses, which is a qualitative study now, due to the fact that we could not use the survey, which shows positive effects of empowerment in one of the SPOCs that we now studied. So the specific study was on the RCR course, How to Do Things Right. And we think that more study needs to be done to see if these effects are also shown in the other courses, so the other 3 courses and 1 MOOC, and that we also need to use quantitative data to scrutinize the data that we already found in the explorative study. So we aim to use a mixed method study, and we have more survey results, luckily, from our other studies in the other SPOCs. And we try to see there, and we have to do these analyses. We're currently working on these, and see if the effects are indeed lasting in the other courses as well, and if we can say even a bit more on what specifically stimulates the empowerment of students and what barriers could be overcome. So these are my conclusions so far. I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Mariette, for your engaging, lively, and also very interesting presentations. And yes, we do have a number of questions, really. Let me just start at the top. Helene, she asks, to what extent might these educational materials, be useful for bachelor thesis supervisors to strengthen the supervisors, in responsible supervising of student research? Well, what are your views on that, Mariette?
Yeah, so we developed this very specific course for supervisors, and which will be available within a week. We're finalizing it now. I think it could be very helpful there as well. Supervising is a kind of, well, it's something that you do in various phases. So I can imagine that it could also be helpful for at different study phases. We initially focused on PhDs here because at Utrecht University we developed these course materials for the early career researchers. But yes, I do think you could take a look at it, and it's could be helpful, although the examples that you could use might be a bit different, because in the bachelor studies you are not confronted with these authorship issues, for example, to use the same example as I did before. So the examples that you use will be possibly a bit different, but the structure is the same, I guess.
Yeah. Eva Bobst, she asked, a simple question, is this course, your PhD course, is that available for everyone, for all graduate students and other people maybe as well?
Yeah, so the intention is to have everything publicly available for everyone. With regards to these SPOCs, we have a technical issue to deal with, but they will be put on the Embassy of Good Science. The course environment is Moodle-based. We try to put it in the embassy as well, but it might be that you have to use a registration system via Utrecht University for a while until all the technicalities have been solved. But yes, initially everything will be open, and especially the MOOC will be on Coursera, so that's open for all from January onwards. But the end game is at the end of this project in June 2022, all the course materials will be available and on the Embassy of Good Science. Okay, so people have to wait a little bit, but it will all become available. And maybe a follow-up question, Mariette. What about materials? Is everything open access? When I'm teaching a course, can I use that materials, and can other teachers do that as well? Yeah, well, there is, of course, you can use these teaching materials, and sometimes I know that people, myself as a teacher, also like to use some particles of courses that you find interesting. So, for example, the cartoons or the video, and I'm happy for you to use them freely, but I would advise you to take notice of the teaching philosophy. So if you put it into a different context, for example, where you put an FFP perspective, so falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism perspective on as a great emphasis on your course, on everything that can go wrong within science, just to warn the students, then the empowerment that we built into the design of the course might disappear. So it does need the additional teaching philosophy as well, I would say. So you can use everything freely, and I'm happy if you do, but do provide teacher manuals to help you a bit with how to use these course materials.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, that qualification. Thank you. Tamarinda Hoven has another practical question. How do you deal with reviewing all the materials students submit in your spook? How do you and your team review them, and how is this scalable? And maybe additionally, how will it happen after the money of the European Union has gone?
Yeah, so everyone who's doing the teaching has to put in their own teaching time. That's the basic idea. I don't have to do that, if that's the question. So reviewing and giving feedback on assignments is simply the teacher's task. So as long as I'm teaching a course, that's my teaching time. Reviewing the materials themselves, so keeping them up to date, that's another interesting part, of course. For each of the European projects, this has an end time. So 5 years, for 5 years, we will upgrade it as a team, as a consortium, but then we hope that by putting it also on the embassy, people in the embassy will also contribute to it, and a teacher network will help to further develop these materials.
Yeah, so it will be part of the Wiki environment on the MSc of Good Science, and other people can change your content. Is that what you say, Mariette?
Yeah, certainly, yeah. Yeah, that's basically the idea, that everyone can contribute to it and also create new versions of these teaching materials, because I do not have the idea that most of the teaching materials will last that long. They always need upgrades.
Yeah. So dear audience, if you have more questions, please post them in the Q&A function, and this gives me the opportunity to ask a question, Mariette. We talked about this before, but it might be interesting for other people as well. I love your emphasis on empowerment. I believe that is important to equip researchers to navigate dilemmas they encounter in practice. But it also introduces attention, and you mentioned it already briefly in your answer to the last question, attention to the regulation, the codes, the box ticking, the compliance aspects, which is there as well in research integrity and responsible conduct of research. So how in these courses and how do you advise your teachers to handle this tension?
Yeah, so by assuming that we can awaken a motivation in each of the researchers that are participating in these courses by making it very relevant to them immediately. So we do show the code of conduct, and we give them all kinds of information about it, but we do not stop there. So many of the courses simply introduce the course of code of conduct and then say, well, you have to know what's in it, and that's it. But we immediately try to make it relevant to themselves. And by trying to do that, we try to stimulate an attitude amongst researchers where they embrace the relevance of the code of conduct in their own projects, and also make them see how these principles, but also the very specific guidelines that are put in the code of conduct are not just words written down, but are something that can be used as guidelines in your own reflections. And also the Erasmus Dilemma game is also, I think, a very good opportunity of cases. Well, it's just a huge selection of cases where you can immediately show the relevance of these of regulations and protocols to be used in their own research practice. So we continuously try to bring all these things together by not only focusing on regulations, but also showing the relevance to them. So for example, the assignment that I showed you with trying to figure out how things are arranged within your own institution, it's emphasizing on the one hand the relevance of all kinds of regulations that are there within your own organization or within the wider context, for example, European context, the GDPR regulations, for example, but immediately also relating it to their own research project and ask them, how is this relevant for you? Do you pay sufficient attention to it? And if not, what strategies do you need to actually take this fully into account? Yeah.
And maybe another question, what is next contents-wise? I'd like you to do the whole range, from undergraduate students, graduate students, supervisors, high school students. should be the lower classes of the high school and even maybe even primary schools be involved in research integrity education? Do you have ideas on that as well? Because the philosophy seems to be if you start early, you can help people to navigate this dilemma maybe a little bit better.
Yeah, well, I do not immediately have the ambition to start at primary schools, but I think it's already a challenge to get it embedded in high schools. But I think that lifting on science education movement a bit more could at least help us to embed these tools and discussions on research integrity in high schools also. My ambition actually goes the other way around. So many senior researchers are still not fully educated on these issues. And within the universities, we often tend to think, oh, if we are going to organize trainings on research integrity, we need to start with PhDs and maybe the lower study phases as well to include them already a bit. But senior researchers are hardly ever addressed, and it's hard to catch them to make it obligatory for them to take these types of courses or trainings. So I think there is really a big challenge to try to attract them also. So the dîner pensant, for example, is a method to try to attract senior researchers, and a course on for supervisors. And I know within AmsterdamUMC there is also this course on supervision. These are attempts to address the issues also with senior researchers that also need to become much more aware of their own role in discussions on research integrity and how they can also help young researchers to reflect much more carefully on these issues.
Yeah. Well, that's clear. But a well-known problem, and you know it as well, I believe, is that the people who need it most won't be attending these events and these course type of events for senior investigators. Yeah. And in some countries, they make it mandatory. Is that the road to go, to mandate this type of education and training for senior supervisors, or should we not use the stick and use the carrot, but use other carrots and better carrots?
Yeah, so far in my teaching philosophy, we've been using carrots. That doesn't mean that the stick is never allowed, but yeah, I'm still confident that we can still reach a lot by using the carrot, by trying to appeal to them and invite them to think more of these issues, to more openly discuss these issues. Also, for example, by these subtle assignments that we put in these courses. We have a course on supervision and mentoring where we oblige the student who is participating, or the PhD in this case, who's participating in this course, to make an appointment with their own supervisor within the time that the course actually runs, and discuss some of the integrity issues that they think are most relevant to them. And at the end of the course, they have to report that back in a live online session that we organize. And this is already involving the more senior people into the courses, actually. And the funny thing is that most of these participants come back and report back, and then are really relieved that their supervisor is also just a simple human being who also has some conflicting thoughts sometimes, or has struggles with these issues. And when they openly discuss it actually is a relief to both of them. So it really opens up the discussions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've seen it work as well, and it's wonderful when it does. That's great. So maybe final question for you, Mariette. What are your dreams for future research? You focused on empowerment here, and you told us that measurement instruments for empowerment are not yet in the validated form available, but I believe you did a great job in walking around it a little bit and exploring empowerment quite well. But that is only the process. That's only an intermediate variable in a way. Do you envision that empowerment really leads to better behavior, more responsible behavior, I should say, and less questionable behavior? And do you want to measure that well in future projects? Well, provided that you get grants for it, of course.
Yeah, well, let me remain modest here, because I'm inclined to say yes, of course we would like to do that, but it's really difficult, of course, to measure the exact impact of your trainings on such a long term. So we will probably never know, but certainly attitude and a change in behavior is something that we would like to measure more, and also a bit more on the long term. So and that certainly is something that we are inclined to do, and I want to scale this up. So also the MOOC will consist of some reflection issues that we will monitor and also study a bit more. And we are planning to do more long-term research also with follow-up surveys, for example, with participants of the courses, for example, after a year or so. So yeah, certainly we would like to continue on this road and also combine it with other experience. For example, the Path to Integrity project also has very interesting perspectives on how to measure the changes that you aim for in your research integrity courses, and bring that all more together. And I think there's a really lot of work to do in this particular field, given the fact that so far the focus has been quite much on only increasing knowledge in these courses.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And thank you again, Mariette, for your excellent presentation and sharing your thoughts on the topics in the discussions.